You're buying a multi-unit, you have to ask these questions. There's rarely any multi-units that come up, but what we're finding is they're sitting on the market for a lot longer. Usually a house sits on the market for 1 month, we're seeing 3, even 6 months of multi-unit sits on the market. Why is that? It's not like people don't want to buy them, it's just you have to be super diligent about the questions you ask to cover yourself from a big liability. So again, they are first in line, you're a second in line. So if it is tenanted, let's say it's a 4-unit and 2 units are occupied, those 2 tenants are first in line. So technically you're third in line. And you have to ask the agent, do they know if there are tenants there? And the first question, of course, would be yes, we know that there are 2. Then the other question is, have there been any tenants in the past 6 months to years that have moved out? Because they indeed also have rights. So that's the second thing. If they live there for the past 6 to 12 months, they still have rights. They still are able to purchase. The third question is, are they exercising their rights, or are they interested in purchasing? Simple as that. Typically, the listing agent or the house that is listed on the MLS, the agent has already asked these questions, the listing agent. So your buyer agent has to ask these questions to the listing agent, almost like a checklist. And it would go through, have they exercised their rights, or have they expressed interest? Now, if they express interest, we go into number 4, and that's when they have to sign paperwork expressing their interest in purchasing, or not. They waive their rights. So in DC, it's very tenant friendly, and they give them the first right of refusal. That's what it's called, first right of refusal. So if they do want to exercise their rights, they are going to go through a process to explore that, get financing, and it's lengthy. DC gives them a lot of time. When I'm talking about a lot of time, I'm talking about 120 days plus until they say no and they sign off their rights. The tenants have their right, because you don't want to kick them out. You want to make sure, DC wants to make sure that they are able to find and stay in their home that they're currently living in. If they are exercising their rights, this is where you could kind of star that and say, I'm not interested in this property, because you are now second or third in line. You have to wait 120 days or whatever it is for you to get rights. So even if you go ahead and buy or put in an offer for the 4-unit, you ratify the contract, the title insurance, the title company, and the loan officer won't give you the loan, and the title company won't give you the deed if that tenant is still exercising their rights. They're still in the relationship with the landlord that you can't interfere with. So technically, it shouldn't be on the market, or you are technically a backup offer. Now, if your agent asks and the seller says no, they signed off their rights, they're not interested, that is very important, and you want to see that documentation saying, hey, look, they're not interested, I'm now first in line. So both tenants and a former tenant have signed off what's called a TOPA affidavit, stating that they are not interested. And there's a whole process of doing that. That's why I have a great partner, Katie, at Universal Title, that helps me navigate this process. So 6 is they're not interested, and that's when you get to jump in and buy this multi-unit. You've bared all these steps, and maybe that's your value add, is walking through these steps with your agent and coaching the other agent, because a lot of people don't know about this right, and about waiting in line and how it needs to be clear for title and for your lender. So keep tuned. We're gonna have Katie come on here, ask her some questions about you and covering your tush to make sure that you make a good investment and you're not wasting time. And you know what? Asking these questions will actually save you money, because what I've noticed is that we're able to negotiate a higher price, or a lower price for properties when we go through this process. So just keep tuned. Let's keep talking about it. I'll see you right in a few minutes. Thanks so much. So I have Katie here from Universal Title. She's looking great. It's a busy day, so
it's a busy day.
I appreciate
it. Is busy settlement day.
It is. So end of the month is usually when closings happen.
Title people get a little nuts.
Yes.
But we're having a good busy day today.
That's good.
Yeah.
So through the transaction, when you do finally find the multi-unit, it's good to have Katie here.
Yeah.
At the beginning, at the bookends.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some special title concerns that come into play when you're buying a multi-unit property that are good to think about at the beginning of the transaction so that you know what to expect.
So what things, we were talking about tenants being first in line.
Yeah.
And the buyer being second or even third, depending on how many tenants there are. So we did an example, there are 2 tenants, and then let's say there's a third tenant that moved out 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So in that situation, let's say they are interested in purchasing the property. What would happen then?
Right. So I think what's important for people to know is that you hear a lot of talk about TOPA. TOPA in DC is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And it means just that a tenant in a rental property may have an opportunity to purchase their home. And it's a way to keep people from being displaced. So if you're buying a tenanted property, it's important to know that the rights of the tenants need to be observed. You need to give tenants notice of what's happening with their homes. And then if a tenant does want to purchase the property, they're going to have an opportunity to respond to those notices, say that they would like to purchase the property, and take an opportunity then to put their financing together, negotiate a contract, and hopefully go to closing on that purchase. So while that's a good thing in a lot of ways, it can be a complication for buyers who are looking to buy tenanted properties. But I think it's a complication, but it doesn't have to be a problem. There's lots of ways that you can think about it and address it and deal with it so that you get the benefit of buying a multifamily property that may have tenants in place that are going to start paying you rent immediately.
I mean, wouldn't that be nice?
It's not a bad deal.
It's definitely not a bad deal. And I think, the cash flow is definitely a perk. Now, some people ask, what if they're not qualified? Does that matter?
The tenant?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the tenant, if they are going to actually exercise their right to purchase the property, they do need to actually come up with the financing in order to do it. And what the DC law is trying to do is sort of level the playing field a little bit so that tenants have that opportunity to purchase a property that they're living in. It can be a tremendous opportunity for a tenant who is living in the right place at the right time and can make this happen.
So it can definitely be an option where you are second in line wanting to purchase and this tenant is able to get financing together. However, the law protects the tenant in such a strong way that even if they're not, they say they're doing something and they might mean something else, meaning that they might say they're interested in purchasing the property, but they're not.
Well, so there's a couple of different nuances here. The DC law is written in such a way that they are trying to be protective of tenants. They're trying to be protective of people who are in some sort of turmoil, really, with the status of their home. So a tenant not only has the right to purchase the property, but that right of the tenant, in some situations, is assignable. So we're talking about multi-unit properties here. It's important to keep that distinction between multi-unit and single-family homes. But if I, as a tenant, have a right to purchase a property, I might be able to exercise that right to purchase the property, or if I choose to, I can assign that right to someone else.
Really?
For consideration.
Wow.
Really?
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. No? So
even if I, the tenant, don't want to purchase it, I could express my interest and then assign it sell it? Are you saying sell my interest?
You
or
can.
like to my
It is
brother,
called an
or-
assignment, but it is an assignment for value. So you do hear talk about people selling their tenants' rights.
Right.
But
So there is a value to it.
there is a value. There's a value to tenants' rights. I mean, let's say, as a buyer, I've gone out and found what I think is a great deal
Right.
on a 4-unit property. I'm probably not the only one who thinks that's a great deal.
That's true.
So if one of the tenants in that building assigns their tenants' rights to someone who also thinks it's a great deal,
Wow.
then suddenly the rights of that assignee have kind of stepped in place in front of my rights under the contract as as an outsider who is hoping to buy the property. If it feels complicated, it is. And that's not to deter anybody. One of the things that I love about working with Nick is that we will sit down together when we're talking about the sale or the purchase of a tenanted property and think about having a plan in place from the get-go on how to work with the tenants, how to make sure that the tenants are getting value out of the transaction, to make sure that the landlord is able to transfer their property in a way that, respects everyone's rights and wishes. And if you think about it a little bit in advance and come up with a plan, there's frequently a way for the person who wants to buy the property and still make sure that the tenants have their opportunity to purchase if they want it, or have someone to assign their tenants' rights to that will still allow our deal to move forward.
Right. So you could deconstruct it in a way, it sounds, that if there's a process and a formula that works.
Yes. And I think it's important for the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, TOPA, not to scare buyers away from the purchase of multi-unit properties, because although the rules sound complicated and it seems like there's a lot that can go awry, we actually are helping buyers and sellers buy and sell multi-unit properties on a daily basis.
Right. So this is not a nuanced thing. This happens all the time. It's very common, and we're talking about it more and more frequently, and that raises awareness and the level of awareness that our clients need to know about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it provides value. We were talking about this, that having this down might be a benefit to both sides. So, the seller might want to sell for a higher price, but we're willing to give him all this information process that we've put in place as the buyer to therefore decrease the price if we're able to get rid of this big clouded
demystifying TOPA
demystifying
is a huge benefit on either side of the transaction. If you are the seller and you know clearly what steps you need to go through and what you can expect, then it is a clear path to being able to sell your property. Right. On the buyer's side, if you know what to expect, it is the seller's obligation to make sure that the tenants are given their rights, given their notices for the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. But as a savvy buyer, if you are aware of what that entails, then you can set your expectations appropriately, and you also can probably make sure that you are a source of knowledge and help as opposed to a hindrance to the process.
Oh, 100%. And agents know that, and sellers know that if you're a hindrance, they're going to actually increase the price, increase the barriers to entry. Yeah. How about if we shift away from multi-units, what about single family? Yeah. What happened recently in 2018 that is actually good for landlords, good for selling a tenanted property?
Yeah. So DC has created a distinction between a single family home and a multi-unit property, 2 or more units, when it comes to who has tenants' rights, how those notices are given, and how the tenants' rights can be exercised. So for a single family home in DC, the tenant is entitled to notice that their property is being sold, that the home that they live in is being sold. But unless that tenant occupied the property prior to 2018, and the dates are very specific, March signing the lease, April moving into the property of 2018, unless they were there before those dates and are elderly or disabled, the tenant doesn't actually have an opportunity to purchase. They don't have a right of first refusal on the property.
So they can't put a value on it and assign, like we were saying, there's a market value for these rights. For the multi-unit, not so much.
For single family homes, even if a tenant does have the right to purchase the property, the assignment can only be in very limited terms. So you can agree to assign your tenant's rights in exchange for being able to stay in the property for a year at the current rent, but it is not a situation where there is a sort of a secondary market for tenants' rights. But I think what's most important about this is that with single family homes, DC has kind of acknowledged that the landlords in those situations are not managing huge multi-unit buildings. They may be managing a home that they used to live in and have now used it as an investment.
Sure.
It's a slightly different scenario.
Got it. Different lens they're looking through than a investor mogul that owns many multi-units. It's just a normal guy or gal lived in the unit or maybe bought one investment property, now wants to sell it. They're not getting super difficult to sell.
The requirements are less.
Mm-hmm.
And this makes it easier for an investor in a single family home to sell their home. But what I always emphasize when we're talking about the tenant opportunity to purchase, we are only talking about the opportunity to purchase the property, not the right to continue to live in the property. So one of the things that I think is important for investor buyers to be aware of, and let's face it, if we're buying, we're always investing, right?
Sure.
But
yes.
if you are going to be a landlord, if you are going to have tenants in your property, I think it is your responsibility as the buyer of the property to get a little bit familiar with landlord-tenant law in DC.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Make sure you know what the rules of the road are so that you can make sure that you are taking care of your tenants who are making your investment such a good investment, but also that you are aware of what you can and cannot do as a landlord in the event that your tenant is not respecting your property or respecting the terms of your lease.
I think it's huge. I think echoing Katie, you have to know and be committed to this wealth building journey of being a landlord. It's not a stroll in the park, but you do have reliable partners like Katie, myself, property management companies, and you want to treat your tenants like you want to be treated. Mm-hmm. And you also want to buy and invest where you see yourself buying, because those are the tenant population. You also want to be super careful about the screening process, so it makes it easier on the back end if you ever want to sell or negotiate some sort of agreement with them. So also interviewing the current tenants is something that is pretty common, meeting them just casually. So you want to make sure that you're vibing with them, so you make so that when you do go and enter the building with a 24-hour notice, it won't be difficult. You can replace things easily. It's a healthy relationship, or else what we find is that you're going to be selling it in 2 years for a loss.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't want
We
that.
don't want that.
No.
We don't want that. There are also lots of rules and responsibilities that you have as a landlord to act fairly and equitably when you're renting your property, to make sure that we are creating a community in DC where we have housing that is available in a fair and affordable way.
Level playing field.
And a level playing field for tenants. So being informed on those topics is definitely a prerequisite, I think, to becoming a landlord. And what's, I think, a tremendous opportunity for the people who are in the right place in the right time is being able to buy a multi-unit property that you intend to live in. Because you are never going to have a better sense of how that building operates than you will if it's your home.
If it's your home, yeah, certainly so. Or you get to live in it, count the income towards your income to qualify, which increases your purchasing power, which is an amazing tool that FHA and conventional loans, so you do a Fannie Freddie, as long as it's under 4 units, you could actually qualify the income from those 2 units, even the 3rd unit, potential rental towards your income. So let's say you qualified for 200, now you qualify for 600,000-700,000. Now there is responsibility.
Yeah.
You have to get with the tenants, make sure that they're right. There's a lot of deferred costs.
It's not 101 level home owning, right? It's like 201 level.
It is definitely not. And that's why I say start off with a single family residence. The nuances are a little bit less. And there's huge value here. So if you're looking for a house in this market, and as you know, Katie, closings have slowed.
Yeah.
Right? Inventory is less. Because of the rate swing. They went from 3% to 7.5% just in a few months, June 2022, even earlier than that, and now we're in May, almost May 2023. What are you seeing now? Are you seeing more contracts coming through?
So we have seen business pick up again. As of about middle of March, I feel like things have kind of been moving in the right direction.
Traction.
We do have a seasonal business, so spring is usually the busiest time for real estate transactions. So I anticipate that we will have a spring that is nowhere near as crazy as 2020, 2021 were, but that is healthy. And it's hard to speculate on the market, but I have really high hopes in our business that buyers and sellers are going to kind of see where rates are, understand how that impacts their buying power, and start to make the decisions that they need to for their lives and their real estate portfolios that they may have been holding on to for a minute while rates seem to be in flux.
Definitely in flux, and where the front end, you're the back end, we see the buyers kind of coming to us, which we're seeing an increase of. So on our end in May and as early as March, we saw a lot more inquiries, but the issue is inventory. There's not a lot out there because of the high rates. Where do people go? They can't sell their house because it's a lot more to buy. So it is more important to get with your realtor, your title company, to figure out solutions for these houses sitting on the market. So they're either going in a week or they're going in months. They're sitting there. So there are houses there, single family with tenants, and that might be a good opportunity to regroup with your team and figure out a plan to strategize. I want tenant occupied, and this is what I'm going to provide. And that way you get a house without hassle, significantly below market, and you could just refinance later.
Yeah, I think that there are so many options out there for folks who are willing to think creatively during this period of time where you may have some properties that wouldn't normally be sitting on the market and are because of where rates are. And I really do hope that in informing yourself on what it is to own an investment property, what it is to own a multi-unit property, that the title issues that surround tenants won't be a deterrent, because I'll tell you, we deal with it every day, we deal with it efficiently, and we can really kind of create a path for almost anyone and anyone's goals when it comes to buying a tenanted property or owning a property that is tenanted.
Since rates are so high, a lot of my clients, and we're talking about with clients, is refinancing. Now, there's 2 reasons you would refinance. The cash flow is better, right? So you're able to maybe take out the 20%. If you put 20% down, you get a higher ARV, do some value-add improvements, do sort of a BRRRR, which we've been talking about. What is the cost of refinancing? Is it an easy process? Hard process?
So
How quickly could we do that?
A lot of it depends on what your loan to value is on the home that you're refinancing. And most of that are things that a lender is going to be able to walk you through. But from the title perspective, when you go through a refinance, you do have most of the costs associated with taking on a new loan. So the lender's fees, the establishing of a new escrow account for a new loan, and the title insurance for the new loan. But you don't have title insurance for you again as the owner of the property. And also, it's important to know that while you are prepaying interest and putting money into an escrow account for a new loan, you're also getting that money back from your old loan.
Gotcha. So it's not a sunk cost.
So the other thing that I think is important to know and to speak to a lender about is that sometimes those fees that are associated with a refinance can be financed in a way that they aren't usually as part of a purchase. So you can decide to borrow a little bit more and not have to pay closing costs for your refinance.
Got it.
And for some people, that may very well be the way to go. That may be how you are able to get into that next loan. And listen, just because you've bought a little or borrowed a little bit more in order to refinance doesn't mean that that principal amount always has to be part of your loan. With most residential mortgages, there are not restrictions on prepaying your loan. So if you finance an extra $5,000 to cover your closing costs, you can pay yourself back that $5,000 a little bit at a time by making principal payments on your loan. So just keep in mind that while some people would say, why would I want to finance closing costs over the course of 30 years? It's entirely up to you how long you finance those closing costs, because you can decide to pay them off sooner.
So thank you so much for coming
You're welcome.
Katie. I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the last thing I have on my mind is marry the house, date the rate.
100%.
Because just like Katie said, you can refinance 100%. After.
Yeah.
And it's the house you're committing to in the process of being a landlord, and we're there for you. And then you could just refinance and kind of play around with that monthly payment.
Yeah. I'll tell you anecdotally.
Okay.
I've been in this business for a while now. I'm not going to say how long. But during the course of between maybe, I would say 2009 and 2013, rates went down on a pretty steady basis. And I had folks coming in to refinance with me maybe once every 18 months. They were like frequent flyers at that point, because every time the rate went down enough to make it feasible, they came in to do a refinance. They were rate daters, and they were rate serial monogamists, right? So the idea is that you buy an investment property, that investment property pays you back over time, and the financing of it is always up for negotiation. So think about that.
I love that, because we're here to get you an investment property. I think that's the focus, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And we're here for whatever challenges, so you can get a value add and maybe refinance sooner than you thought.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. This is again Katie with Universal Title. You can
Katie
find
Griffin.
her.
It's very nice to meet you on Capitol Hill.
Yes, Capitol Hill, Universal Titles, Baltimore, Virginia,
all
Maryland,
over the place.
DMV.
We're all over the DMV, all the way up to Baltimore, all the way down to Chesapeake, Virginia now.
Okay.
And we even have Universal Title in Florida and Seattle, Washington. So, taking over the world.
One step at a time.
Yeah. So
her contact information is below. Make sure you subscribe and like. We'll have Katie here again to maybe talk about tax benefits when buying, first-time home buyer incentives in DC, whether you're first time or repeat. So keep tuned.
There's lots of good stuff.
Thank you.